do have some ASL interpreters. We're going to, do our best to make sure that they stay spotlighted throughout the presentation. So, make sure that you've got your view set the way that you want it so that you can see them front and center. And we will also be sharing a PowerPoint. So, kind of adjust your screen so that you can still see them as well as our PowerPoint presentation, however it is that'll kind of fit your needs the best. We also have captions available. So at the bottom of your screen, if you want that, you can go ahead and turn on, closed captions, and you'll be able to see those captions being typed up. Throughout the session today, feel free to utilize the chat function. If you do have questions as they pop up, our presenters will be monitoring the chat so that we can make sure that we address everybody's questions throughout the session. If you do choose to, want to come off mute and ask your question verbally, we just ask that you use the reaction functions at the bottom of the screen and raise your hand. And then one of our presenters will call on you to make sure that we can get your question answered. There will also be an opportunity at the end for any additional questions. So, if you want to, kind of wait and ask your question at the end, we'll make sure we give time for that. Again, if you have any technical difficulties throughout the session today, you can message the Sonoran Center in chat. We do have somebody, on that today, and they'll be able to try to assist and help with any technical difficulties. And then finally, on behalf of the Sonoran Center, I would like to read the university's land acknowledgement statement. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to Tohono O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. Okay, so for today's session, we wanted to, bring some folks on to really focus and highlight our tribal vocational rehabilitation programs that are available not just in our state, but in other states around the country. So we've got some great presenters here today that are going to, kind of share some of the history of tribal VR programs, how they got started, share some of the services and supports and the way that they work with individuals in their communities. And then we have Kristen Mackey here representing State Vocational Rehabilitation, and she'll share some information about how State VR and Tribal VR can partner together to benefit their mutual clients. So without further ado, I will mute myself and share my screen, and then, Paula, you guys can take over.
Thank you, Abel. Paula Sinas Yanishya, Kintachitni Nishland, Toy Glini Bashin, Hadanati Dashichedo, Ashin Dashanala. I'm introducing myself and my 4 clans, and I also will ask Triva to introduce herself.
Yeah, today, Triva Rongboard in here. Okay, so it's pretty difficult. Yeah, only this video talk about another. Watch it at New Mexico. I didn't get enough. Thank you.
So I'm the director for the Navajo Nation's Office of Special Ed and Rehabilitation Services. And our program is, I'm calling in from Window Rock, Arizona. We have offices throughout the Navajo Nation. And we are the vocational rehab program provider for Navajo people. Triva and I are going to tag team this presentation. She was the director prior to me. I came on board as a director in 2017. And so prior to that, she was the director of the program, and I was the assistant director. So next slide, Abel. So we want to provide you some history about the American Indian Vocational Rehab Services and how they were established. Just want to point out that while there's 94 tribes funded across the country, there are actually 574 federally recognized tribes across the country, 167 indigenous languages spoken across the United States. Navajo also has its language intact, and that's one of the reasons that we also provide services to Navajo people. We just want to set the foundation that in 1975, Public Law 93-638, the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act was passed. And that set some of the motion in place for tribes to have the authority on how they administer funds and have greater control over the welfare of their own people. This was a landmark legislation or law passed by Congress because of the failures of Indian policies of the past. So the Indian Self-Determination Act was passed in 1975, and that's really not too long after that, in 1975, the Navajo Nation was awarded a vocational rehab demonstration grant from Arizona Department of Economic Security Rehab Services Administration. And there was a lot of work done with Region 9. Herb Leibowitz at the time was the federal program officer in San Francisco. And so he also helped with structuring and setting up the Navajo Nation current vocational rehab program. You want to add anything to that, Triva?
I just wanted to mention through the Region 9, back then there were regional offices with RSA, and Navajo Nation, as I mentioned, was under Region 9, Region 6, Region 10, not Region 10, Region 8, and Region 9 took the lead. With that, Herb Leibowitz was placed on assignment with the Navajo Nation to work with Dr. Elmer Guy and drafting the language to include in the amendments at that time in the Rehab Act. And they worked closely with also the different oversight committee with Congress, the Senate committees to draft the language, and that's how American Indian Vocational Rehabilitation was established and added into the amendments of the Rehab Act at that time.
Next slide, Abel. So this is to reiterate some of what Triva mentioned. Navajo Nation leadership worked with Congress to advocate, not just for Navajo, but Alaska Natives and American Indian tribes to provide vocational rehab services. And as mentioned, Dr. Elmer Guy was one of the initial directors of the vocational rehab program. And he was instrumental in educating Congress and working with congressional members about unmet needs and culturally appropriate services for vocational rehab. So Dr. Elmer Guy is currently the president of the Navajo Technical University, so he remains essential in helping to continue to train individuals, young individuals, as well as individuals with disabilities. So the American Indian Vocational Rehab Services was first introduced during the 1978 amendments of the Rehab Act. And the 78 amendments eventually created the American Indian Rehab Program, which eventually became American Indian VR Services. Next slide. Truly, you want to cover the set aside?
Yes, the set aside that was set up at that time was 90% federal, with the going back a little. The set aside from that was put into the American Indian VR program under Section 10 of the Rehab Act, and the monies were used from there. At that time, the first initial amount that was set aside was $700,000.
Can you speak up a little bit, Triva?
Sorry, I'm on the road. So the set aside that was put in there at the time, at the onset, was $700,000. And then, of course, it increased to $800,000. And Navajo Nation was the first program that applied for the services. So they put in 90% federal, 10% match from the Navajo Nation. And then from there, from 1980 to 1985, Navajo Nation was the only program, Indian tribe, that was funded. Thereafter, 5 additional tribes applied, and they were funded in 1985, which is the Shoshone Bannock, the Chippewa Cree, Salish Kootenai, and there was one other tribe that were funded, and they were the ones that also came on, and that's when the tribal programs applying for VR services really moved forward.
So our programs are discretionary grant programs, and so there is a set aside from the entire VR dollars that is set aside for tribes to apply for funding. Next slide, Abel. So the act used to be under Section 130 of the Rehab Act. So in 1986, the reauthorization language included tribal programs or American Indian VR service programs to be allowed to provide culturally relevant services traditionally used by tribes. It also extended the service area to tribal citizens living beyond the reservation boundaries. So it included language in the eligibility criteria as on or near the reservation. In 1981, when Navajo began receiving the funds, they had to submit a grant application, and it was funded under Section 130 of the Act. Right now, they changed it to Section 121. That's why some of our programs call us Section 121 programs. You want to add anything to that, Tribal?
Yeah, it was Section 130 Part D. Thereafter, it was changed to Section 121 Part C. So there were changes made there. And then the near reservation, because a lot of our tribal members, they live near the reservation, and that was the language that was up to how the tribes defined the near reservation definition that was given. We were given that authority to do that. Well, with the Navajo Nation, it's a 20-mile radius outside the reservation line, which extends into 3 states.
Okay, next slide, Abel. So as Shriba mentioned, it's authorized under Part C, Section 121. And so we follow the regulations, the 371 and the 361 regulations. I just want to point out that the states submit unified plans, state plans. Our tribal programs still have to apply for discretionary grants. And it's a competitive grant process that comes out once a year. And we have to put together a competitive grant that identifies the needs in our communities. It identifies the services that we're going to provide, our whole methodology of how we're going to provide services. So each tribe is different. They set up their vocational rehab program based on the needs of their communities. There's a lot of tribes in Oklahoma and also Alaska that are funded under this section. So the U.S. Department of Education, they release a notice inviting applications for new awards, and then they, on an annual basis, and then they also provide the program rules and regulations and the review and selection process for vocational rehab programs to be, they have to apply for. The match is a 10% match. The federal funding is 90% and the tribal funding is 10%. These can be in kind, or they can also ask for a waiver. Next slide. So the secretary authorizes a percentage of the allotment. So the language in the rehab is not less than 1% and not more than 1.5 of the appropriation. The secretary has not raised the allotment beyond the minimum of 1%. So I looked up the figures in for 2021, approximately 27 million was available for new awards, and it's dependent on final congressional action and contingent on the availability of funds and the quality of the applications. So estimated number of awards was 51 for 2021 and a range of 300,000 to 360,000. You want to add anything to that, Triva?
Next slide.
So again, the purpose of the program, and this is directly out of the language in the notices for proposed rules. The purpose is to provide vocational rehab services, including culturally appropriate services, to services to American Indians with disabilities who are on or near federal or state reservations. And then it's consistent with eligible individuals, strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, etc., for them to prepare for and engage in high quality employment that will increase opportunities for economic self-sufficiency. So very similar to the purpose of the overall Rehab Act, but we have to also assure that applicants who are eligible for services have available services in their native language, or of course the appropriate mode of communication. Next slide. The eligibility criteria, we have 6 eligibility criteria. Individuals have to be an enrolled member of a federal or state recognized tribe. They have to reside on or near the reservation service area. Sometimes, we get applicants in Phoenix and we refer them to the state via our agency. They must have a mental or physical impairment. The impairment must constitute or result in a substantial impediment to employment. So these last 3 are very similar to the state. Vocational rehab services are required to prepare for, secure, retain, or regain employment. And then the individual can benefit in terms of an employment outcome from vocational rehab services. So vocational rehab is not for everyone. It's not an entitlement program, just like the state. And we are required to apply this eligibility criteria to all our applicants. So next slide. So this is just a map. You'll see the little dots. So there's 90, that's supposed to be 94 programs in the states. So next slide. So these are all the programs listed by state. So Alaska, you'll see, has 11. So we have grown over the years to 94 programs across 26 states. New Mexico has 2, Arizona has 5. Fort Mojave tribe, they extend into Arizona and California. And so since their main office is in California, then they're counted there, but they also serve individuals on the Arizona boundaries of the reservation. So you'll see that Washington State and Oklahoma and Alaska have the most number of tribal VR programs. So next slide. Treva, I want you to talk a little bit about KNAR. KNAR was established, it stands for Consortia of Administrators for Native American Rehabilitation, and it's very similar to CSAVR, to provide a forum to help American Indian VR programs study, deliberate, and act upon matters. Do you want to cover this slide, Treva? How KNAR was established?
The Consortium of Administrators was established in January of 1993 through the University of Northern Colorado up in Greeley, Colorado, under the leadership of Dr. Ken Naliai. I'm sorry if you hear background, I'm in front of a business, so I'm just trying to count. I'm sitting in my vehicle. But anyway, there was a program that was a section that was funded called Cultural Diversity Initiative. And through that is how the University of Northern Colorado decided to focus on American Indian and tribal vocational rehabilitation to really help provide that support. So that's how KNAR was established, to be the voice and ears for American Indian vocational rehabilitation program, to look at all sections. As Paula mentioned earlier, one of the things that was really needed was also professional and Native American professionals in the area of vocational rehabilitation, because vocational rehabilitation was still, I think even to this day, is still very new in the Indian country. So there were 6 programs that were at the table when KNAR was established. Navajo was one of them, Sanam Rock, Assiniboine Sioux, Salish Kootenai, and the others, they were at the table when it was established. And they wanted to select a chair for that for KNAR. And the first president of KNAR was Rusty Cantrell out of Assiniboine Sioux. And that's where the different sections that's outlined here provide resources, organize and convey and disseminate collaborative position to service providers, related facilities, provide means of communication, related organization, relating to provision, education, and research, conducting and supporting research documentation, and promoting and maintaining services outcomes, conducting and supporting efforts to increase the number of American Indian practitioners in vocational rehabilitation. So these were the areas that were identified to move forward of what KNAR was going to be doing. Next slide.
This next slide just shows a timeline that Treva talked about, established in 1993. And again, KNAR has really been helpful in drafting legislation, helping with preparing. They have 2 conferences a year, an annual conference and a mid-year conference. Generally, the tribes host those conferences, and it's an opportunity for professional development and growth for new and upcoming counselors, directors, rehab technicians. Next slide. Again, these are some of the primary goals of KNAR, looking at some of the values of education, advocacy, accountability, culturally centered inclusion, innovation, and honor. And it's a recognized advocacy program to help policy changes, funding, legislation for inclusion of all American Indians with disabilities, provides comprehensive training and continuing education. It builds leadership and the capacity for leadership at all levels.
I just wanted to mention that through KNAR, the amendments of the Rehab Act, that they really, one of the things that KNAR did was also to establish very strong partnership with the different organizations, just like the state's CSAVR, the National Federation on blindness, the deafness and hard of hearing organization, the state agencies, the different regional offices for rehab training center and continuing ed, the RSA regional offices. So they became very strong advocates for American Indians and Alaska Natives vocational rehabilitation program. So when amendments were made, they also testified on behalf of tribal VR programs. So that really also increased the funding and extended, and increased the programs across the country. And like Paula mentioned, in 26 states. So they really were the person that really were the voice in the ears to really advocate on behalf of American Indians and Alaska Natives with disabilities to increase services, to increase funding.
Next slide. We just wanted to point out that, as I mentioned earlier, American Indian Vocational Rehab programs are established based on their own culture, their own language within tribal programs. I have here just a couple of diagrams, or the one on the left is the Navajo VR process. And we, as you can see, it's circular, it's relationship-based intake from the east. We're looking at the entire holistic program. I'm sorry, the program is the holistic, treating people from a whole holistic approach. So we're looking at the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual of each individual. We start with the East with relationship-based intake. As I introduce myself and as Truva introduced herself, we recognize our 4 clans. That's how we address our applicants and consumers to develop that relationship, understanding what community they come from. All our staff that are hired are serving the communities that they come from. So they're recognizing the community as leaders, and so the going down to the south side is when we do eligibility and IPE development, or individualized plan for employment. That's the physical side or planning piece. Program of services is the emotional piece on the west, and that's when we provide the services. And then to the north is the spiritual direction. And these are our 4 sacred colors as well. And so you'll see on the north, it's work and interdependence or independence. And that represents the resilience or the Sahasan. I see that Elise is on the line from Hopi. And so I want to recognize the Hopi vocational rehab process on the right. And corn is sacred to many tribes. This particular Hopi planning vocational rehab process is based on the Hopi planting process. So it begins with the application and their planting eligibility. Then they do the IPE. They're nurturing the individual through provision of services. Then on the west side, it's growth, following them through employment, and then closure is the harvest. So I'm sure I'm not presenting it like how Dr. Sikesua would present it, but I just want to acknowledge that each tribe has its own process for how disability is viewed, how we work with their abilities, their unique abilities. And so you want to say anything else about this slide, Tribal?
I was going to say that, when a person applies for services or when the counselor is meeting with the individual, it's just not a matter of here you have to fill out the application and stuff. As Paula mentioned, plan is very important. That establishes the relationship, because in that is also trust, and then also the confidentiality of how you're going to protect the information of the client that you're meeting with. But family is also very important, because plan establishes the relationship. The person might be your mother, it might be your father, it might be your grandparent, or it might be your child. So that's really important. And when you establish that, then you establish that relationship, because that trust is very important, and the confidentiality of the information that that they provide you, and you establish that relationship, and so they begin to be more open, and it's not just a matter of here's an application, fill it out, now we're going to move forward. So when you establish those things, it makes it, it helps the client, it also helps the program and moving the plan forward, because in your mind, you're thinking about the 4 directions, exact case and all that, as Paula mentioned, as you went through the 4 sections of the holistic approach and providing the services to the individual. And then with the Hopi, what I'm understanding is that they're planning, and then they're nurturing it, and then they're taking care of it, and then the harvest. So that's a really, because corn is also, that's very sacred to the Navajo people.
So obviously, this is not a linear process. Individuals can be provided services even after they've been closed. So we just wanted to share our VR process as we implement here on Navajo and at Hopi. So with the next slide, I just also wanted to point out that we have an emphasis on working with youth as well. And so American Indian VR programs have collaboration with states, the state VR program, and we set aside some of our funding within our grant application to service youth with disabilities and to work with the schools here on Navajo. We have Bureau of Indian Affairs schools, we have Bureau of Indian Affairs operated schools, we have public schools, we have some we had some charter schools, and we have some private schools. So we have a number of schools across the Navajo Nation. So these are just a couple of examples. Navajo Nation is working with the state of Arizona through the Sonoran Center on Excellence on Disability to utilize some of the funding for work-based learning. And so we have on board Chinle, Window Rock, and Kayenta. Well, Chinle's coming together, but we're working with Window Rock schools. In New Mexico, we have a Project Search, which is an international program that works with individuals with youth and helping them get work skills in the community. So we work with the business Hilton Garden Hotel, University of New Mexico, Gallup-McKinley County Schools, and of course, New Mexico DVR. So collaboration with the state is essential, because you'll see that if a tribe is receiving $300,000 grant, they're not able to serve their entire population based on that funding source. I just also want to point out that New Mexico DVR also funded Hope Project with Jemez Pueblo, and that stands for Hands-On Preparation and Experience. And it's for youth with disabilities to help them with work experience, skills, and so forth. And then the last slide is transitions us into our cooperation with the states. In the next slide, Abel. We're required to enter into cooperative agreements with the states. The states it's a mutual thing. So the agreements are for interagency referral and information. Also provides for procedures for providing vocational rehab services, strategies for provision of transition planning, as well as provisions for sharing resources. So we have a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding or Memorandum of Agreement with Arizona RSA, the state of New Mexico, as well as the state of Utah. And we share resources. We have some cases in common where we're both serving the same individual. before I turn it over to the state director, Triba, do you want to add anything with regards to the state corporation?
I just wanted to mention that the cooperative agreement or memorandum of understanding, that's really important, and also serving on the State Rehab Council, the SRC, and you have a voice to be at the table, not only advocating for your program and on behalf of your consumers, you're also a voice when you're at the table for all American Indians within your state, because that partnership is very key, even especially those where you're doing shared cases with the state agency. So you're also conveying that information and what the population looks like, because it's really important that when I talked last week, I said KNR does not only speak on behalf of individuals that serve as board members for their own programs. You're talking for all American Indians and Alaska Natives across the country. So I know in some areas, some programs are not able to serve on the SRC. So it's really important. So your voice and your participation on the state council, the state plan is very important. So that cooperative agreement helps you. With Navajo, there are 3 cooperative agreements with Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. I'm sure that's the same way with Fort Mojave, with California, Nevada, and also Arizona.
So I want to transition to the final slide and turn it over to Kristen.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Triva.
you, Paula. Thank you, Triva. That was great background information. I'm Kristen Mackey. I'm the administrator of the Vocational Rehabilitation Program in Arizona. And I just wanted to, as they were talking about those agreements that we have, the purpose of those agreements, outside of the federal requirements that Paula read through, really is to ensure how do we complement each other in providing services to Indians, individuals with disabilities living on or near the reservations. And how do we do that well in coordination so that we're not duplicating services, but we're complementing each other. As you heard, the state VR programs have significant amount more money and resources in order to provide services. But there are some things that, a state VR program would not be able to provide in terms of culturally, some of those employment outcomes that would not be, quote unquote, have a labor market in our, urban societies, but they might be a viable career on or near a reservation. So those are where some of the, we can provide some of the services, the tribal VR programs can provide some of the services. Both entities are able to, walk through that process together. So really what we want to do is co-enroll clients. So clients, again, can be eligible in both cases. We each have our own different eligibility criteria. So just because they're eligible for one entity doesn't ensure that they are eligible for another. Most likely they will be, but just wanting to make sure that folks don't think that there's not reciprocity on eligibility, but our eligibility criteria are pretty similar and aligned. In terms of the state VR, we also work to help to support individuals from our sister tribal VR programs in attendance at various conferences or trainings. We share and review policies, procedures, best practices. I know Paula and I have shared resources back and forth. We've reviewed information in terms of state plan or policy writing back and forth. So just being a resource and support to each other. And as Paula mentioned, we do have Fort Mojave as having a MOU with us. They do most of their work with the VR program in California, but we have an agreement with them. We also have an agreement with Navajo Nation, Hopi, White Mountain Apache, Salt River Pima, and Tio. So we strive to have direct connections with those different tribal entities in this and around the state. So for instance, I know that we met with the group from TO several months back, and we introduced, all of the partners to each other. So program manager from the Tucson area, some of her staff met with the VR tribal program folks. We exchanged information. We reviewed that MOU together. We each put in information and changes that we wanted to see to that MOU so that it would work well for both parties. So this is a collaborative agreement between both the tribal and the state VR program. And I'm happy to share that, we're working through Sonora and USAID to be able to work through some of those transition projects, offer pre-ET services to individuals on youth on the Navajo Nation, and looking forward to maybe growing some additional programs there. Yeah, don't have anything else unless there's a little bit of time I can share. We heard CSAVR, that's the Council of State Administrators for VR. I am a part of that council. The 78 different VR agencies in the nation and territories can choose to be a member of CSAVR. And then as Paula and Triva noted, we work closely with each other to ensure that as regulations go through, as there's different policies and practices that are being discussed and considered, that we make sure that we have mutual information flowing back and forth. From a state VR program, we have our grant is a formulary grant. And so based on the demographics and various methodology of formula, that's how we are allocated our grant award, and we are allocated our grant award every single year. So unlike the tribal VR programs, we do not have to submit a competitive grant award or a solicitation. We don't have to respond to a solicitation every cycle. We do submit a state plan every 4 years with an update every 2 years. But our grant is based on a formula grant, and it is a significantly more money than the tribal governments receive. We also, serve and employ significantly more in number of individuals, which is a reason why we can help to support also. And that's what I have. I can turn it back over, Paula, Triva, Abel.
Abel?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button while I'm sharing my screen, so I've got it now. I'm just trying to catch up on the chat, but it looks like a lot of the questions might have been answered, but I'm just scrolling through because I wasn't able to look at it. So yes, a couple of people are asking about slides, and so all of our webinars are recorded. The recording will be posted to our website. I think we're taking a little over a month right now. Am I thinking about that right, Ava, to get it, kind of set up and then posted onto the website? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so there'll be an announcement that goes out once it's officially posted. So the recording will be available, so folks can come back and access it and see the PowerPoint slides and all of that. So keep an eye out for that. I also want to share, before people start jumping out of here really quickly, there will be a survey that's going to be sent to you guys in just a couple of minutes. Please fill out that survey. That gives us really good feedback about our webinars and the content, and it helps us kind of plan for future webinars. It was just posted there in the chat. So again, please take a moment to fill that out. And then I always like to give people kind of a heads up of what's coming next month. We will have another session in our Advancing Employment webinar series featuring ASTAP, which is the Arizona Technology Access Program, a partnership with our sister USAID up north, the Institute for Human Development. So ASTAP will be coming on talking a little bit about their program, about different types of assistive technology and how that technology can be used to support people in employment. So that should be a very a good session with some good information. I see a question here. Could you share a case example of a client served by both programs?
Hi, Linda. The a really good example is the students that are transitioning from the School for the Deaf in Tucson. We'll get the referral. Arizona Rehab Services will get the referral. We'll do our eligibility. We sign documents to share information with each program. When we develop the individualized plan for employment, the state may pay for tuition at Gallaudet, for example. We might pay for the transportation there, or books and fees. So developing that comprehensive plan, we talk about it. Each counselor talks about what is needed with the consumer, and the consumer's needs are met from a comprehensive basis, with us sharing in the costs of some of those services. Do you have an example, Kristen?
I was thinking, we do have several counselors up in the Flagstaff area that live on the reservation as well. And so they're connected with their community, and they serve mutual clients there. And so just like you were explaining, Paula, everybody comes together. And so while they're working on an IPE, that is for the Navajo Nation, we're working on an IPE that is for the state VR agency. They're working on it together and in tandem with each other. And so identifying, VR, the state VR program may have more resources in terms of vendors, the number of vendors that can serve clients. And so can we pay for job development and retention services because that individual now is going to move into Flagstaff to look for work, or that individual is moving into Phoenix to look for work. And so we have vendors that will be able to provide the service in those areas, whereas, there may not be the vendors available from the tribal program. So those are the conversations that happen with each of the clients as they develop those plan for services and just identify which services are appropriate and who might pay for those. So I do know that we have a fair number of clients in the Flagstaff area and clients in the Tucson area as well.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Paula. And I think Triva's popped off already, but
I'm still here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Triva, also for joining. I think it was all great information. Any final questions that folks want to ask while you have these three here? I will share briefly with folks. Oh, go on. Yes.
I do have a quick question. I want to just thank everyone for always getting this stuff out. First of all, to those across the country, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area supporting the WRP and DoD shared list, an amazing federal resume builder and program that will support individuals who get internships in the federal government, an opportunity for federal careers. Again, this is from post-secondary all the way to PhD, 5 years after graduation. And again, these different federal programs kind of get tricky because of getting the information out, and enjoy when I have the moment to be on these conference calls just to share. There is a due date for the 2024 internships across the country and actual world, because many of these internships that are paid are, on different bases and things like that. That will be October 12th. I did share some information in the chat, but if you do have any additional questions, I'll put my email in the chat. And I'll also send an email to the email address to Paula as well. I think to Mr. Young, I did send an email over there. So again, thank you so very much. And you guys are doing an amazing, amazing work. And, I'm here to support all of you as much as I can, however I can. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to mention on the dual cases, with 2 counselors, with 2 agencies providing services to the individual, that really is a plus for the consumer. Because, there's 2 individuals, 2 agencies advocating on their behalf and really providing that support. So it really is important for the collaboration between the state and the tribal VR agencies coming together, even if there's no dual cases. But, with dual cases, I believe that the individual receives a lot of that opportunity and resources that they would need so they could be successful and becoming employed and thereafter. Well, I'm going to get off. I need to get back on the road. So thank you, Paula. And
Thanks,
for all of
Trina.
you for doing the work that all you do, that really means a lot. I'm retired, so, but I continue to advocate for individuals with disabilities across the country. Thank you. Yeah, take care of yourselves.
Thank you again, Treva and Paula and Kristen. If there's any
In the
other
chat,
questions, ask them now. If not,
there's a
again,
couple in the chat, and Kristen did respond, but I just want to read it. It says, can both state VR and tribal VR attend the IEP meetings? And
Yes.
of course, yeah, we're invited by the school. If we're invited by the parents or the student themselves, then we do attend IEP meetings, so both can attend. We do
I think
outreach.
Oh,
We also
sorry,
do
Paula,
outreach.
just
Go ahead, Kristen.
real quick. And that's a good, you said it, is you have to make sure that the school invites each party. And so that's where we kind of struggle sometimes, is the school doesn't always invite everybody. So it's really that connection with the school to make sure that the folks from the different parties are invited and that they're aware of who they should be inviting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, and the student also is made aware of the VR services. Our counselors visit the schools in their area to provide information. They do outreach. Again, we're doing some transition efforts with the schools, some work-based learning initiatives. So that really gets us into schools on a consistent basis. And we get referrals, to attend IEP meetings, and we get referrals for services as well. And I just wanted to invite Amanda Race. She is one of the Tribal VR programs directors in Alaska, and they do a lot of subsistence style outcomes. Subsistence lifestyle includes, wood vending, hunting, fishing, berry picking. So I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, Amanda, just to give an example of how you're working in VR services in Alaska.
Hi, this is Amanda Race. I am based in Fairbanks, Alaska, in the interior. There are 10 other projects that are funded in Alaska. We primarily serve the rural communities. We have 37 recognized tribes in the interior for a total of 42. 9 of them can only be reached by the road system. All other villages, we have to fly in, which could take a day, day and a half. So our individual plans for employment are mostly engaging our consumers with subsistence activities that Paula described briefly. I put a link in the chat to our specific page. It's current with the exception of the veterans information. I'm currently have 2 vacant positions right now for VR counselors, so I am a 1-person show. It's the end of the fiscal year. But we purchase equipment based on the plans for employment that might include four-wheeler, boat motors, all the gear that you would need to hunt or fish, with the exception of guns. We've purchased nets, snowshoes for trapping, trailers to haul behind your four-wheeler so you can go out and cut wood with the chainsaws that we purchase. So we're almost setting folks up for a small business, except it's for individual use. They also provide for their family, relatives, other community members that might live in the villages. We have villages as small as maybe 25 people to as large as 200 or 300 folks. Again, only 9 of those are connected to the road system. Everywhere else we're flying in. So that's all I can think of for now.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for hopping on and sharing some more information. I know we're pretty much at time, but again, any last minute questions folks want to either hop off mute and ask or throw in the chat. You've got another minute here before.
I think Lanny asked the question. You want to?
Yep. So okay. Oh, Kristen,
go ahead. Sorry.
Are you answering?
Well,
that?
I think they're asking if does Navajo have a ASO counselor?
No.
Okay. I am not aware of other tribal entities having a fluent ASL counselor either.
And that's another item in the cooperative agreement that, you know, we are supported by Arizona RSA to help us with some of these specific caseloads, sometimes mental health caseloads or other types of caseloads. Arizona has some of the individuals, counselors that are on specialized caseloads.
I think we answered all the questions now, Abel. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you guys for monitoring that better than I did this time. So I appreciate the assist. So again, thank you everybody for attending. You know, that's all of our time here today. Again, next month we'll have ASTAP on, and you guys will see this recording post in about a month or so on our U of A website. Have a great day, everybody.